Eagle News International. On tonight's headlines. Hurricane Fiona made landfall in eastern Canada's Nova Scotia. The NHE said the storm would affect many parts of eastern Canada as a powerful hurricane-force cyclone. Canada issuing severe weather warnings for much of its eastern coast. In Russian-held areas of Ukraine, start of referendums to join Russia that are widely seen as a sham. And the votes come as many Russians are creating traffic jams at the border, trying to avoid a draft to fight in Ukraine. And President Marcos said nations should abandon the idea of nuclear weapons as deterrents and should work towards bringing down the stockpiles of nuclear weapons in the world, a task that he admitted is easier said than done. And a spectacular farewell for tennis great Roger Federer as he bows out with a Laver Cup defeat. And tonight, a hurricane exceedingly rare in the Atlantic coast of Canada, but Fiona is bearing its brunt there now as a Category 3 storm. Officials are warning it's set to be one for the Canadian record books. First, let's listen in.
It was pretty rough, not a lot of major damages. Some of the windows blew in where we were able to temporarily fix them.
This morning, very easy for me actually. Very windy outside. We had some minor damage to the premises, but nothing serious. Right? We had a slight little door blowout, a window blow in and out. That's about it.
Fiona now moving north after brushing past Bermuda this morning. This is in Bermuda, and it did knock out power. Heavy rain and wind pounded the island, and officials opened shelters and closed schools. But the eye of the storm stayed well away, and Bermuda was largely spared. Fiona killed 4 people in Puerto Rico earlier this week, while 1 death was reported in the French Overseas Department of Guadeloupe and another in the Dominican Republic. President Joe Biden declared a state of emergency in Puerto Rico. And ever wondered what the inside of a hurricane looks like at sea level? Now this is what Fiona looks like from the inside. 50-foot waves and more than 100-per-hour winds. This was captured by a drone as the storm crawled up to the Atlantic. The footage comes from the Sail Drone Explorer SD-1078. It's a surface vehicle that gathers data around the clock to help scientists better understand hurricane intensification and processes. And now an update. Hurricane Fiona made landfall in eastern Canada's Nova Scotia earlier today, according to the U.S. National Hurricane Center, with maximum sustained winds of 144 kilometers per hour. The NHC said Fiona is expected to affect portions of Atlantic Canada as a powerful hurricane-force cyclone, and significant impacts from high winds, storm surge, and heavy rainfall are expected. Again, let's listen in.
Fiona is expected to affect portions of Atlantic Canada as a powerful hurricane-force cyclone late Friday and Saturday, and significant impacts from high winds, storm surge, and heavy rainfall are likely. So in Puerto Rico, more than 40% of the island was covered with 15 inches of rain, so that's 380 millimeters of rain. There was a maximum of 32 inches, which is 800 millimeters in 48 hours in some parts. I mean, these are just absolutely enormous quantities of rain.
Before that, however, Fiona left a significant impact on Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, with mudslides, damage to property, and widespread loss of power. Fiona was a reminder that all of the Caribbean has to stay prepared to face any level of impact from storms. And essentially, countries and people here in this part of the world spend, roughly half their month sort of on a knife's edge, wondering if this is their year.
Now, the U.S. National Hurricane Center said the center of the storm, now called post-tropical Cyclone Fiona, is crossing eastern Nova Scotia, bringing high winds and heavy rains. Although a gradual weakening was forecast during the next couple of days, Fiona was expected to maintain hurricane force winds until Saturday afternoon, Canada time. Formerly designated a hurricane, the storm battered Caribbean islands earlier in the week, killing at least 8 people now in an update and knocking out power for virtually all of Puerto Rico's 3.5 million people during a sweltering heat wave. Nearly 1 million people remained without power 5 days later. Now, here in the country, Carding intensified into a severe tropical storm, and it's forecast to strengthen into a typhoon before making landfall over central or northern Luzon. Signal number 2 now raised in parts of Luzon. Here's DOST Pagasa weather specialist Raymond Ordinario.
Base dito sa latest satellite animation, nakita natin na gumaganda pa ang itsura ng bagyong si Carding. Nangangalugan na lumalakas pa ito at patuloy nga kumukuha ng lakas at enerhiya dito yan sa Pacific Ocean. Bago ito tumama ng kalupaan ay magiging typhoon intensity. So papalakas ang hangin, kaya binabantayan natin sa ngayon. No? So kahapon, ng ating focus ay nandito sa ulan. Ngayon, babantayan na natin ang dalang hangin ng bagyong si Carding dahil nga lumalakas pa ito bago tumama ng kalupaan. And nakikita natin, no, so pagtama nito ng aurora bukas, so that will happen on Sunday afternoon to evening, ito ay babaybay ng northern part ng Nueva Ecija at lalabas dito sa may Pangasinan area. So ngayon, ito na yung track natin, so mas mababa na siya compared dito sa mga nakaraang track natin. And at the same time, lumalakas ang bagyo bago pa tumama ng ating kalupaan. At lalabas ang area of responsibility ng Lunes ng gabi or Martes ng madaling araw. Sa ngayon, nakataas ang babala ng bagyo bilang 2 dito sa southeastern portion ng Isabela, which includes nga yung municipality ng Dinapigue, sa northern portion ng Aurora, sa Dinalungan, Kasiguran at Dirasag, at sa isla ng Pulillo. Samantalang signal number 3 sa malaking bahagi ng Luzon, makikita natin dito sa ating kulay asul na mga kulay dito sa ating mapa. Ito na yung lawak ng signal number 1 natin, which includes the southern portion of Cagayan, not including Peña Blanca, Igig, Tuguegarao City, Enrile, Solano, Tuaw, Piat, Amulong at Rizal. At ang nalabing bahagi ng Isabela, buong Quirino, Nueva Vizcaya, southern portion ng Apayao, which includes nga yung Conner, buong Abra, Kalinga, Mountain Province, Ifugao, Benguet, the southern portion of Ilocos Norte, which includes Nueva Ecija, Badok, Pinile, Bana, City of Batac, Corimao, Paway, at Marcos. Signal number 1 din na nakataas sa buong Ilocos Sur, La Union, Pangasinan, rest of Aurora, Nueva Ecija, Tarlac, Bulacan, Pampanga, Zambales, Bataan, at dito sa Metro Manila. Nakataas din yan sa northern and southern portion of Quezon. At nakataas din yan sa probinsya ng Rizal, Laguna, Cavite at northern portion ng Batangas, which includes Malbar, Balete, Tanawan City, Santo Tomas, Talisay at Laurel. Nakataas din yan sa probinsya ng Camarines Norte, sa northern at eastern portion ng Camarines Sur, which includes Del Gallego, Ragay, Lupi, Sipocot, Siruma, Tinambak, Goa, Lagonoy, Garchitorena, Caramoan, Presentacion at dyan sa may San Jose. And the northern portion of Catanduanes, which includes Pandan, Caramoran, Bagamanok, Panganiban, Viga at Gigmoto. Sa ngayon, nakikita natin na wala pa namang nagiging marawak ang pag-ulan. Ngunit, paghahanda ang ating pinapayo sa ating mga kabayan sa malaking bahagi ng Luzon, including Metro Manila, kahit maaraw pa sa ngayon ay paghandaan na magiging epekto ng bagyo simula bukas hanggang Martes, ang pinakamatagal natin na pwedeng maramdaman ang mga hagupit at ulan na dala ng bagyong si Carding.
Meanwhile, Typhoon Talas approached eastern Japan today, bringing heavy rains and killing 1 person, a week after another major storm battered the country. The agency has issued warnings about high waves, heavy rains, landslides, and floods in central, eastern, and northern Japan. That includes Tokyo. A man in his 40s died after his house was hit by a landslide in Kakegawa, Shizuoka Prefecture, and a separate landslide in Hamamatsu, also in Shizuoka Fukuoka Prefecture. 3 people, including a 9-year-old boy, suffered light injuries, according to public broadcaster NHK. Police could not immediately confirm the reports. Now, last weekend, 4 people were killed and 151 injured after Typhoon Nanmadol slammed into southwestern Japan. Scientists say climate change is increasing the severity of storms and causing extreme weather, such as heat waves, droughts, and flash floods, to become more frequent and intense. Now, a powerful earthquake that rattled Mexico this week was also felt further afield. It sparked a desert tsunami in the middle of the Death Valley. Take a look.
So this is a big earthquake, whatever it is.
Now, waves up to 4 feet or 1.2 meters sloshed around the Devil's Hole 22 minutes in an episode captured on this video. The seismic energy had traveled 1,500 miles through the Earth's crust to the water-filled limestone cave in Nevada. The phenomenon, which is known formally as a seiche, stirred sediment and rocks in the pool, likely giving the few dozen resident pupfish a bit of a surprise. The pupfish, a rare species that got its name from the apparent similarity between male mating behavior and puppies playing, feed on algae that grows on a shelf in the deep cavern, but appear to have escaped unscathed. Now, Monday's 7.7 magnitude quake left 2 people dead in western Mexico. It damaged several thousand buildings and sparked panic more than 400 kilometers away in Mexico City. Now, it was followed by another quake on Thursday that also killed at least 2 people. And in Russian-held areas of Ukraine, the start of referendums to join Russia that are widely seen as a sham. The vote comes as many Russians are creating traffic jams at the border, and they're trying to avoid a draft to fight in Ukraine. Take a look.
Мы надеемся, что будет более действенные меры по принуждению к миру, фактически. Мы очень хотим. Мы стали гражданами ДНР еще в 2017 году, как только раздавали паспорта. Уже 2 года, как получили паспорта Российской Федерации. То есть у нас однозначно только в России. Я прошу прощения. Как вы думаете, когда нас...
Уже надоело, во-первых, то, что правительство киевское, вот это, которое сейчас правит Украиной, они бомбят неправильно, хотят там сулить плохой мир, а Россия, наоборот, против войны, против того, чтобы люди погибали. Экономика, чтобы нормально во всех странах была. Поэтому я пришел тоже за это проголосовать. Тоже хочется нормально жить вместе с Россией и с мирными людьми.
Ці референдуми є приводом того, як Росія хоче нашими ж братями з тих територій, мобілізуючи їх, воювати проти своїх братів, які зараз на фронті з нашої сторони.
Now, critics dismissed today's vote to join Russia, held in Russian-occupied Ukraine, as a farce. No secret ballots, no foreign observers, the vote overseen by pro-Russian militias. U.S. and NATO officials expect Russian President Vladimir Putin will use the vote to justify annexing more Ukrainian land and then threaten to defend the territory with nuclear weapons, potentially setting the stage for a nuclear standoff. President Putin has his back against the wall and is facing growing backlash against his new military draft. Some Russian men are trying to escape with massive traffic jams at the border. One estimated even to be 6 miles long by online map tracker. Now, flights out of the country are also sold out for now, and they are very expensive. Take a look.
нельзя сказать, что в панике. Такой сценарий обрабатывался. Билеты стоили, когда я покупал, я, видимо, быстро сориентировался довольно. А границу проходили нормально, просто прошли и улетели.
Ukraine's President Zelensky, speaking in Russian, encouraged Russians to protest, fight against President Putin, or surrender once they reach Ukraine. More than 1,300 people were arrested at demonstrations across Russia after the announcement of a partial mobilization. Flights out of Russia to the neighboring countries that allow Russians visa-free entry were nearly entirely booked, while prices skyrocketed. On Thursday, the Kremlin dismissed as fake reports that Russians eligible for mobilization were rushing for the exit. The European Union is facing a tough balancing act over how to deal with Russians fleeing military mobilization, as some countries look to block entry and others offer possible refuge. Finland, the only member that had kept its land border open with Moscow, reported that arrivals from Russia doubled to 6,470 the day after President Putin's announcement. And a new UN report by independent investigators concluded that Russian troops carried out war crimes in Ukraine, including rape, executions, and torture.
Bucha was one of the places where we found executions and ill treatment before executions, as mentioned in our oral statement. There have been many reports by international organizations, by NGOs, etc. But I think we are perhaps the first UN fact-finding mission to conclude that we have found war crimes. Well, the investigation in those 4 areas showed a large number of war crimes by the Russians, and we found 2 incidents of ill treatment by the Ukrainian. So in that sense, there are war crimes on not only the Russian but also on the Ukrainian side, but of course, according to what we find, much less, only 2 cases.
The commission also documented a wide range of crimes against children, he said, including some who were raped, tortured, and unlawfully confined. Russia has repeatedly denied allegations of war crimes. Authorities in Iran say dozens have died in nationwide protests with the death of a young woman in police custody. Take a look. Now, for 8 straight days, violent protests have gripped dozens of cities across Iran, sparked by the death of a 22-year-old woman who was pronounced dead 3 days after her arrest in the Iranian capital for wearing the hijab headscarf in an improper way. Police deemed that the pants Masha Amini was wearing was too tight. Within hours after being taken into custody, she was brain dead. Then 3 days later, dead. Activists said she suffered a blow to the head in custody, but this has not been confirmed by the Iranian authorities, who have opened an investigation. On Friday night, Interior Minister Ahmad Vahidi said Amini had not been beaten. The street violence, which IHR says has spread to 80 towns and cities, Iran has imposed tough restrictions on the use of the internet in a bid to hamper protesters gathering and stop the flow of images of the backlash from reaching the outside world. The United States announced Friday it was easing export restrictions on Iran to expand internet services, days after SpaceX owner Elon Musk said he would seek an exemption from sanctions to offer his company Starlink satellite service in Iran. The new measures will help counter the Iranian government's efforts to surveil and censor its citizens, according to Secretary of State Antony Blinken. At least 35 have been killed in more than a week of protests. Now, in one video shared by the Oslo-based Iran Human Rights non-governmental organization, a uniformed member of the security forces is seen shooting an AK-47 assault rifle at protesters in Tehran's Ferdowsi Boulevard. It said other footage showed a stream of state security forces on a Tehran highway on Friday night. Security forces have carried out a wave of arrests of activists and journalists, including Nilufar Hamedi of of the reformist newspaper Sharg, who reported on Amini's death. Angry demonstrators have taken to the streets of major cities across Iran, including the capital Tehran, for 8 straight nights since the death of the 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. The Kurdish woman was pronounced dead after spending 3 days in a coma following her arrest by Iran's feared morality police for wearing the hijab headscarf in an improper way. In tonight's other news, UN agencies say the situation for Sudan's most vulnerable children is so desperate that half of the most severely malnourished youngsters are expected to die without urgent humanitarian intervention. Take a look.
As we speak, 50,000 kids are suffering from severe acute malnutrition. If not treated, half of them will die.
At the moment, WFP projected that about 15 million people would go hungry every day since the hunger season started. And we are now doing an assessment because our indicators projected that this could rise up to 18 million by the end of this month. We are still grappling with an increased incidence of intertribal conflicts and violence. And this, in fact, has spread now not just to Darfur, but to other parts of the country. The Ukraine war also has had some significant impact. All of this in the context of a political unstable country has resulted in an unprecedented humanitarian crisis this year.
Now, since the 5-year civil war ended in 2018, the country's lumbering peace process has run into multiple delays, with violence regularly breaking out between Kir and Machar's forces. It estimated that by the end of this month, up to 18 million people could go hungry every day, a rise of 3 million since the lean season started. Starting September 26, the government of Hong Kong will do away with compulsory hotel quarantine for people arriving from overseas places or Taiwan, but they must undergo medical surveillance at home or at hotel for 3 days. Chief Executive John Lee made the announcement at a press conference where he unveiled the new 0+3 quarantine arrangement and other facilitation measures for arrivals. Take a look.
By introducing this new measure of 0+3, obviously, this is a kind of relaxation from the 3+4. So we want to ensure that we will monitor the situation closely so that all the risks are well controlled and things can progress in an orderly manner. All the measures that we consider and roll out take into consideration of the prevailing local situation. We have to ensure that, first of all, our hospital service can cope. We have to protect the very young and the very old who are high-risk groups. We have to ensure that we reduce the number of serious cases and death cases. And we want to do it scientifically. And then, of course, we want to balance the need for controlling the epidemic with society need, economic need, and also to raise our Hong Kong's competitiveness.
From 6 a.m. on September 26, such arrivals will be allowed to go home or go to the hotel of their choice for a 3-day medical surveillance period, right after they have completed a nucleic acid test at the airport. They don't need to wait for the test result at the airport and can leave there by any transport means. Upon obtaining a negative test result, the travelers will be given an amber code on their Leave Home Safe mobile app to restrict their entry to scheduled premises. While they can go out during the medical surveillance period, they cannot enter premises which proactively check the vaccine pass, such as restaurants and bars. Moreover, they have to take rapid antigen tests, or RATs, daily and nucleic acid tests once every 2 days in the first 7 days upon arrival in Hong Kong. After completing the medical surveillance period, the travelers will be subject to self-monitoring in the subsequent 4 days. In addition to the 0+3 quarantine arrangement, Mr. Lee also announced that boarding requirements for inbound travelers will be simplified, under which they must present a negative result of a rapid antigen test conducted within 24 hours before departure instead of a nucleic acid test that was conducted within 48 hours. Unvaccinated Hong Kong residents are also allowed to board a flight for Hong Kong. However, they will not be eligible to get a provisional vaccine pass. Meanwhile, several Hong Kong doctors and more than 20 patients have been arrested over allegedly fraudulent vaccine exemption certificates. Let's listen in.
Regarding the recent incidents of medical professionals issuing medical exemption certificates and abusing this, making fraudulent certificates, we are deeply concerned, and these cases are under the criminal proceedings. And I must emphasize that as a medical professional, I am deeply disappointed by the action of such, because we are entrusted by the public, and we have the duty to protect our public from public health risks and threats. We have very clear guidelines and criteria for issuance of these medical exemption certificates, and these are based on huge experience from the COVID vaccination programs. I must emphasize that COVID vaccine is a very safe vaccine, considering the fact that some of these clinics have actually issued over 100 and even thousands of certificates for exemption from COVID vaccine. This is definitely highly suspicious, and I would certainly urge both our medical profession as well as the public to try to avoid doing this, and this is really a criminal offense.
Now, coronavirus vaccines are not mandatory in Hong Kong, but the Chinese city uses a QR health code system that denies unvaccinated people access to most public premises. Only those with an exemption certificate issued by a doctor can still access such venues. Police announced that 5 doctors, 3 assistants, and 22 patients were arrested this month on charges of conspiracy to defraud after tip-offs. The offense carries up to 14 years in jail. The 5 doctors are accused of having issued nearly 24,000 exemptions, with prices ranging from 350 to over 5,000 Hong Kong dollars. And the news continues here on Eagle News. We'll be back.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. May lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
안녕하세요.
Ba't kayo naghiwalay?
Niyaya ko siya magpakasal. Tapos, hindi siya pumayag.
Kasi naman, hindi pa ako handa, no?
Bakit?
Dapat, siya na yung lumalapit sa'yo.
Okay ka lang?
Kahit ako'y malayo, ikaw pa rin ang nasa isip ko. Kahit ako'y malayo, ikaw pa rin ang nasa isip ko. Ikaw pala kumagat sa akin, ha?
Ikaw pala yung kumagat sa akin, ha?
Doc Willie, ikaw ang boyfriend ni Juliet?
Yes, Abo.
Nakita ko na kasi yung pinalit sa akin ni Juliet, eh.
May tsura?
Nakita mo yung mukha ko?
Oo.
Bawasan mo lang ng 10 kagapuhan. Ganun yung itsura niya.
Philanthropists, celebrities, advocates, entrepreneurs, and industry professionals are just some of the individuals who received the 6th Outstanding Men and Women of the Philippines 2022. We celebrated their remarkable contributions to the community and respective industries and learned a thing or two from their uplifting stories of success. Open for Business was fated as the Philippine Outstanding Brand of the Year. Maraming salamat po. Join us as we bring you snippets from the celebration of the 6th anniversary of the Philippines Best Magazine.
Open for Business with Cesar Vallejos, Sunday, 9 p.m.
Kahit po PA lang ako, masikat po ako sa artista. Dahil palagi po akong...
Late ka na naman, Joven!
Problema kasi dyan kay Direk, tsaka kami Kendra. Puro na lang late. Ang sakit.
Nasaan ka ba? Sa Tagaytay ko. Eh, di ba dito location natin? Tanay! Ang location, Tanay, hindi Tagaytay.
Narinig si Joven.
Tayo pag together, walang talo pag together. Let's dance together sa Net25.
Ang ating game ngayon ay tinatawag nating Malo Bet. Meron tayong marshmallows na nakasabit. Kailangan nakabalot yung partner nyo ng stockings. Kakainin niyo yan. At least matanggal mo sa ating ruler na to. Kung sino pinakamaraming malo na matatanggal in the period of 1 minute, ang team na yon ang panalo.
Nakita po tayo. Quezon City, 8 o'clock. Kada linggo, dito lang sa Net25.
Welcome back. The Philippines' territorial disputes with China and other littoral states in the South China Sea can be addressed through diplomatic negotiations. Now, that's according to President Bongbong Marcos Jr. Today, President Marcos made the statement before the members of the Asia Society in New York City, as he emphasized his call for unity and maintained that the Philippines will continue to be a friend to all and an enemy to none. Again, let's listen in.
As I clearly stated in my State of the Nation address, I will not preside over any process that will abandon even a square inch of territory of the Republic of the Philippines to any foreign power. We know that we can count on the United States to uphold the international law-based order, freedom of navigation and overflight, and the sustainable use and development of maritime resources. We will continue to work towards strengthening ASEAN, particularly its dialogue partnerships with neighbors that uphold regional peace and security. So we have tried, on a bilateral basis with China, although we maintain our position in terms of our maritime territories and their fishing rights, our economic zones, we have nonetheless tried to continue to engage China on that basis, on those subjects. I have always told my Chinese friends, and I said, let us not make our differences concerning maritime, like the baselines, the economic zones, etc. Let us not make that the defining element of our relationship. Because if that is the only defining if that will be the defining relationship of the defining part of our relationship, then we are really at a standstill. I always quote that the way that the United States, for example, and China came together was through ping pong. If you remember, it was because the Chinese ping pong captain played with the United States ping pong captain, and they became friends, and ping pong went to the United States. And this led to Richard Nixon going to China and establishing diplomatic relations. So perhaps that's something. So we must explore everything. We must explore every avenue. We do it G2G, government to government.
Basketball? Could we do basketball?
Basketball could be could be another. But in any single way, we never know.
Now, China and ASEAN are currently working to speed up the conclusion of negotiations and the issuance of legally binding code of conduct in the South China Sea. In May 2022, the two parties resumed the physical textual negotiation of the single draft COC negotiating text during the 36th Joint Working Group on the implementation of the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea in Siem Reap, Cambodia. Now, in the same event, President Marcos also said that nations should abandon the idea of nuclear weapons as deterrents and should work towards bringing down the stockpiles of nuclear weapons in the world, a task that he admitted is easier said than done. Take a look.
Disagreements between China and the rest of the countries around the area. And Korea has threatened to use nuclear weapons. And that would be a complete disaster. And that there is no way that the Philippines will be somehow exempt from that sort of conflict. And it's very interesting to watch what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. And it's very worrisome because if there is a possibility that nuclear weapons suddenly become, even tactical nuclear weapons, not strategic nuclear, but tactical nuclear weapons become part of that equation, then we will see the normalization of nuclear weapons nuclear weapons will become conventional weapons. And perhaps that will encourage other nuclear powers to exercise that nuclear option, which, as we all know, is going to be is really end of world scenario.
North Korea's Kim Jong-un declared he will never give up his nukes, and enshrining a first strike doctrine into law are part of a worrying new escalatory dynamic in nuclear weapons policy around the world, according to analysts. Russian officials, too, have refused to rule out the possibility of a nuclear strike against Ukraine. And President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly made thinly veiled threats of nuclear war, vowing that Moscow would use all the means at their disposal to protect Russia. In other news tonight, a U.S. aircraft carrier arrived in South Korea for the first time in nearly 5 years, ahead of a joint drills and a show of force aimed at nuclear-armed North. Take a look.
What the commitment of U.S. Carrier Strike Group operating in and around the peninsula illustrates is our commitment to stand together and our desire and our focus on ensuring that we are interoperable and integrated to face any challenge or any threat whenever required. As common Pacific nations with a long history, both in the alliance and as well as operating together, we share common security interests and we look to stand by each other wherever and whenever required when those security interests are challenged.
Now, Kim Kyung-chol, Admiral, Director of Maritime Operations Center of the Republic of Korea Fleet Command, said that the exercise is to prepare for anything that could happen at sea and defend the Republic of Korea and to improve the ROK-US Combined Combat Readiness Posture. The nuclear-powered USS Ronald Reagan and vessels from its strike group are seen docking in the southern port city of Busan, part of a push by Seoul and Washington to have more U.S. strategic assets operating in the region. Pyongyang has conducted a record-breaking blitz of weapons tests this year, and earlier this month revised its nuclear law, enshrining a first strike doctrine and vowing never to give up its nukes. Washington is Seoul's key security ally and stations about 28,500 troops in South Korea to protect it from the north. In other news, now is the time to invest in the Philippines. That's according to President Marcos Jr. as he vowed to swing the doors even wider for high-value investments to create more jobs in the country, which he called Asia's fastest rising economic star. Joanne Soriano in New York.
President Marcos Jr. made a pitch before the United States business community to invest in the Philippines, touting the country as the smart investment choice. Marcos, during the Philippine Economic Briefing in New York, described the country as Asia's fastest rising economic star.
I thank you for your continuing interest in the Philippines, which we are touting as, and with great confidence, as Asia's fastest rising economic star. It is our belief that the Philippines is the smart investment choice, and the best time to do business with us is now.
The chief executive also noted that the projected economic performance in the medium term is expected to surpass other Southeast Asian countries.
The country is on its way to a strong recovery from the pandemic and a robust, broad-based growth in the next 6 years. In fact, our projected economic performance in the medium term is expected to surpass our regional neighbors.
Marcos also vowed to swing doors even higher for high-value investment from domestic and international business communities to secure the country's bright economic future.
We will continue our high investments in public infrastructure by harnessing our public-private partnerships mechanism. And therefore, we invite strategic investors from the United States to take part in this Philippines economic resurgence. Key structural reforms have been set into place to allow for wider participation in our industries. With the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises Act, or what we refer to as CREATE, and the economic liberalization measures, we have expanded the space for foreign investments in previously protected sectors, especially those that employ advanced technologies and research and development activities.
He said ensuring domestic food security is a priority.
We will ensure domestic food security by boosting local food production and continue the provision of targeted support for sectors most affected by the rise in fuel prices. An efficient and modern agriculture sector will ensure food security for all and reduce poverty incidence.
Marcos also recognized the Philippines and the United States' long, strong, and enduring ties in trade, commerce, and development.
As today, the U.S. is our third largest trading partner and fourth major source of foreign direct investment. As we slowly rebuild the Philippine economy for rapid growth, we have created an even wider space for mutually beneficial investments.
President Marcos met earlier with members of the U.S.-ASEAN Business Council and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in New York to discuss strengthening economic and investment agenda. He also met with key officials from the United Kingdom and Japan, as well as other economic leaders on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly here in New York. Joanne Soriano, New York, New York. Eagle News, we live in extraordinary times.
Another big story this week was when U.S. President Joe Biden met with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. on the sidelines of the 77th UN General Assembly in New York. El Aguilar in New York City. El.
President Bongbong Marcos Jr. met with U.S. President Joe Biden and assured him that the Philippines remains a partner, ally, and friend of the United States. Marcos made assurance during his bilateral meeting with him at the Intercontinental.
Your partners, we are your allies, we are your friends. And in like fashion, we have always considered the United States our partner, our ally, and our friend.
Thank you. It's mutual.
The U.S. and the Philippines established their formal diplomatic relations in 1946. Over 4 million Filipinos currently reside in the U.S., while nearly 300,000 Americans, including a large number of U.S. military veterans, live in the Philippines. Marcos said the Philippines is fortunate to maintain its very long and strong relations with the U.S.
The relationship, the 100-plus-year-old relationship between the Philippines and the U.S. continues to evolve as we face the challenges of this new century and the events that we have been watching over the past few months, really. So we have very much to discuss in terms of redefining, I suppose, in many ways.
The U.S. is the Philippines' third largest trading partner and second major source of foreign direct investment applications in 2021.
Again, we would like to thank the United States for the massive help that we received during the pandemic, with the provision of up to 35, almost 36 million doses of vaccines very early on. We continue to look to the United States for that continuing partnership and the maintenance of peace in our region.
President Biden, meanwhile, acknowledged that the U.S. relationship with the Philippines has very deep roots, despite the rocky times when the two nations became critical of each other.
The relationship between the United States and the Philippines, to state the obvious, has very deep roots. We've had some rocky times, but the fact is it's a critical relationship from our perspective. I hope you feel the same way. And we have strong ties, including millions of Filipino Americans who are very proud of their ancestry and desperately want us to continue to have a strong relationship. And our foundations are strong in the U.S.-Philippine alliance, which is of critical importance. For decades, the alliance has strengthened both of us, I believe. And one of the things I want to talk about today is how we continue to strengthen that and work together on the things that are of greatest concern to you.
Biden also expressed intent to expand the U.S. bilateral cooperation with the Philippines in the fields of energy security and renewable energy.
I was impressed with the work you did on windmills and a whole range of other things. You and I both think that's the future. We can do a lot. We can do a lot together. I'm desperately interested in making sure we do.
The two leaders also discussed the South China Sea issue, Russia-Ukraine crisis, the rise in energy and food prices, and the importance of respect for human rights.
In addition, I expect we'll discuss the South China Sea and disputes in critical global throughway. I've spent a lot of time with not only the president of China, but others about the international waters and how they have to be respected. And we're also, thank you for your position on the war against Ukraine and by Russia and how it's impacting energy prices and food prices. And we're working very hard to be able to do something about that. And so we want to talk about human rights, talk about a whole range of things, but I mainly am interested to know what's on your mind and how we can continue to strengthen this relationship. And again,
in terms of the geopolitical issues that we face in this day and age, the primary consideration of the Philippines and the guiding principle of the Philippine foreign policy is to encourage peace. And I hope that we will be able to discuss further the roles that our two countries will play together and individually as we continue down that road, maintaining peace despite all the complexities that have arisen in the past few months, I suppose.
From New York City, El Aguilar, we live in extraordinary times.
In tonight's other news, former U.S. President Donald Trump opened his North Carolina campaign rally in support of Republican candidates by bashing New York's Attorney General Letitia James, calling her a raging maniac after she filed a $250 million lawsuit against him, his 3 eldest children, and others at the Trump Organization for Fraud. Take a look.
No better example of the left's chilling obsession with targeting political opponents than the baseless, abusive, and depraved lawsuit against me, my family, my company, by the racist Attorney General of New York State, Letitia Peekaboo James. This raging maniac campaigned for office ranting and raving about her goal. Her only goal is we got to get Donald Trump. We got to get him. She knew nothing about me. This is a gross prosecutorial misconduct, and it's coming in so many different forms, whether it's in Atlanta, whether it's from Washington, D.C., whether it's January 6th, coming from many different forms. There's never been a period of time like this. And rather than spending all of her time going after me and my family, Ivanka, think of it, Ivanka is a very good person. Don Jr., he's a good person. Eric, these are good people. This crazy radical leftist nut job, James, should be going after the killers, the gangbangers, drug dealers at MS-13, savages who are ravaging the state of New York.
Now, James said her office, which lacks authority to file criminal charges, was making a criminal referral to the U.S. Justice Department, as well as the Internal Revenue Service, based on the 3-year investigation. The lawsuit filed with the New York State Supreme Court includes allegations that Trump's annual financial statements for at least a decade grossly inflated property values across his assets, from his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida to Manhattan's Trump Tower, to a staggering degree. He did so to obtain favorable loans with lower interest and premiums, said James, who is running to be re-elected to her post in November.
Probably working with the federal government, of course.
And in sports, a spectacular farewell for tennis great Roger Federer. Take a look. Teaming up in Davos with longtime rival Rafael Nadal in his last match before retirement. Federer and Nadal playing against Frances Tiafoe and Jack Sock at London's O2 Arena. For the 41-year-old Federer, the end of an extraordinary career. The two former world number ones won the first set to the delight of a feverish partisan crowd, but the Americans rallied to win 4-6, 7-6, 11-9. But the match itself was ultimately a sideshow on an emotional occasion for the 41-year-old, who made a lengthy and tearful address to the crowd, his rivals, and family afterwards. He said, "This is not the end, and you know, life goes on." And also tonight, the stunning move by the Boston Celtics, suspending their head coach who brought the team to the NBA Finals. The Boston Celtics suspended head coach Ime Udoka for the entire 2022-2023 NBA season for violations of team policies. ESPN and The Athletic reported that the 45-year-old Nigerian American had a consensual relationship with a female member of the Celtics staff that broke the franchise's code of conduct. The punishment, among the harshest ever issued to an NBA head coach, comes with the Celtics preseason training camp due to open next week. In a statement obtained by ESPN, Udoka said he accepted the Celtics decision. He said, "I want to apologize to our players, fans, the entire Celtics organization, and my family for letting them down. I'm sorry for putting the team in this difficult situation, and I accept the team's decision. Out of respect, he said, for everyone involved, I will have no further comment. Under Udoka's guidance, Boston developed the top defense in the NBA and closed last season on a 28-7 run. They beat the star-studded Brooklyn Nets in the first round and then ousted the Milwaukee Bucks in 7 games in the second round. They dispatched the Miami Heat in 7 games in the Eastern Conference Finals to reach the NBA Finals for the first time since 2010. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. As always, I'll end the day on a thoughtful note. I'll end the week on a thoughtful note. Our ability to look back and smile at our past is proof that God's plan is to keep us moving forward. This has been Eagle News International. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay alert, stay informed, because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.